Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new teen therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
I think that's an avenue of your creativity, how you get to say hello, Rhonda. Well, welcome listeners to episode 185. It's a joy to be here. And what's on your mind today, David?
Well, let's see. I'm getting over my cold and my laryngitis. I still have a tad of it. And there's a lot of exciting things coming up for our listeners. One thing I think we'll soon be able to announce, if you'd like to pre-order the book Feeling Great. It won't be released until September, but I think by the time this podcast comes out, I'll have that information. Maybe can add it to the show notes. And also, there are some upcoming workshops I'd like to mention. On May 17th, there's the Cognitive Distortion Starter Kit with David and Jill. Again, it'll be local in Palo Alto, and then you can join online from anywhere in the world. It's already sold out, believe it or not.
The in-person.
The in-person. And a lot of the onlines have been sold already too. There are still onlines available, but move fast if you want to do that. Now you can find the link to that on my website, feelinggood.com, on the page that shows upcoming workshop schedule. I think it's under the resources tab. And you can find all of my upcoming workshops there. Then I also want to put in a plug for the all-new annual South San Francisco Intensive. The annual intensive isn't new, but we've been going for 8 or 9 years. But this year it's going to have a whole new focus on enhanced, or as I like to call it, advanced empathy training with the 5 secrets of effective communication, the advanced techniques. You're going to learn how to relate to difficult clients or patients, whatever word you prefer, learn how to develop better relationships with loved ones, as well as and the people you care about, as well as the ones you don't care about. And so that really requires a lot of practice. And in the past, I thought I'll devote a half a day to a workshop on empathy training. But it's not nearly enough, and I think with 4 days we'll still be barely scratching the surface. People will really get a chance to see how to use these techniques in difficult situations. It's not only a matter of practice and determination, but also of where your heart is, because it's kind of a spiritual thing as well as a technical thing.
No, it's definitely spiritual to develop compassion for someone else, which is part of the 5 secrets, I think.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, that'll be August 10 to 13th. But in the meantime, on June 4 to 5, I'll be up in Seattle, Washington with my 2-day anxiety disorder class. Again, you can find the link to that on my website, the link to any of these things with all the details at feelinggood.com. And then there's going to be more coming up after that. In a few minutes, we're going to interview Jeff Zeig about this fantastic Evolution of Psychotherapy conference in December. That's the biggest psychotherapy conference in the world, and probably the most fantastic one as well. I'll be presenting there, but you'll be able to hear all of your favorite gurus from all over the world. All the big names will be there. It's in Anaheim. It's December, I don't know, 9 to 13 or something like that. Again, you can link to it from my website. It's a beautiful facility. There'll be probably 7,000 people.
Wow. And
it's really, really fun and friendly and exciting.
Cool.
So let's dive into some Ask Davids. We're going to try to give short answers to things again so we can cover more of your terrific questions.
Okay, before we ask you the questions, I'm going to read 3 really quick endorsements. And one is from someone named Hisham, and he wrote, Your book, When Panic Attacks Saved My Life in 2012. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful thing to say. I appreciate it, and we'll pass it on to my daughter, who helped edit that book and helped shape it.
Yeah. And there is another one that's really kind of funny and heartwarming from Lori. She wrote, I'm finishing up your book, Feeling Good, and just wanted to say how much I appreciate this amazing gift of knowledge. It has revolutionized how I look at things. Nice work. Thank you for making your wisdom available to the masses and for giving me something informative to listen to while I mow our pastures.
Thank you, Lori. And I can say that every day we get these wonderful statements from people, and it means a lot to Rhonda and David. We really pour our hearts out and our minds, and when you appreciate it and benefit from it, that's kind of a thrill for us.
Yeah, definitely. We put a lot of work into it. Here's another one. Hi, Rhonda. I was able to listen to podcast 177 on psychedelic research and was so impressed by the topic and your on-air persona. I think we have another Terry Gross in our midst.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
and so well deserved.
No,
I'm getting a little jealous. But...
So untrue. Well, thank you. This is from Bob. I started out as a bit of a psychedelic skeptic, worrying about introducing another chemical variable in the mix. But the way your team described the process gave me comfort. I'm still uncomfortable about psychedelics in an unfamiliar, to me, clinical environment. But the pain and confusion associated with PTSD probably necessitates this avenue. I imagine one treatment does not fit all, so psychedelics almost certainly can present a positive path for a certain portion of the population. I think I learned something new today. Thanks. Best, Bob.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And having taken psychedelics myself when I was in medical school, the LSD was legal, and so I probably took it 5 or 6 or 7 times. And it is fantastic, but at the same time, it can be pretty frightening. So I think you're right to be cautious that we have to. This is just another tool, an interesting and exotic tool, but I think we have to see what the research shows. Will these things be truly safe and effective? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Cool. Okay, now we start our Ask David. Some awesome questions from listeners. In the first question, you've given it the headline, I don't know how to talk to girls. Help. And this was written by Nandini, who wrote, I have zero experience dating and talking to girls. I don't know how to even make a girl as a friend. Whenever I talk to a girl, let's just say, whenever I talk to a woman...
Girl, you can use this language.
Okay.
I know, I gag on the thing. I don't know which way to go.
I know.
But, yeah, the girl's
Well, I'm
condescending, but there's different cultural differences
Yes, okay.
and stuff.
Okay, I won't edit him then. Whenever I talk to a girl, the next day I think, oh, how should I have talked to her? Should I go to her because now she wants to talk to me? Should I go to her because now she wants me to talk to her? That makes me very nervous. Also, if I'm talking to a girl, I think about when I will have to go to her next time. And when I'm doing my work, when I'm at work, I think, should I talk to her because she works in the office with me? Well, it all means I don't know how to do any of this. Can you help me?
Yeah. Well, give me my typed out answer here, which will go in the show notes. And I'm not going to go too terribly into detail on how to talk to girls, but this is a question that's so near and dear to my heart. I wrote a whole book about this, Intimate Connections. And there's a tremendous amount of resources in the Feeling Good podcasts. And one thing that you can do, all of you, and not just this gentleman, is when you have a topic, you can go to my website and there's a magnifying glass in the upper right-hand corner. And also that's on the home page, and then on every other page, there's a little search function, which is the same thing on the right-hand panel of every single page on my website. And you can type in something like suicide or shyness or depression or treatment or OCD or whatever your interest is, and all the relevant blogs and podcasts will pop up instantly. It's beautiful and very user friendly. But I can remember when I was in college, I was very nerdy and shy, and like totally uncool. I was a minister's son, and it was just like hustling or being cool, or just kind of was considered kind of like a sin from the devil or something like that. So I was never learned how to do any of that stuff. And I can remember there were these two beautiful, we called them girls, we were in college, gorgeous young women, and I was doing construction labor for their father, who was an Amherst College alumni. I was an Amherst student, and so it was very exciting to me to do construction labor. And then for some reason, he had these two daughters that were just so beautiful. It was just, could hardly believe it. And they actually went out with me and my friend Dale Stoft, who was also like me, kind of nerdy. He went to dental school. Sadly I lost track of him because we used to play ping pong together and we lived close together. But they would go out with us on dates, and we go adventuring in the desert and stuff. But I was constantly anxious and shy and trying to hide it. And I wished that I had just known then what I know now, and what we learned also from Michael Simpson and his shyness broadcast, just to say, I feel a little intimidated and kind of a little shy and anxious because you're just so fantastic and beautiful and smart, and so I don't know.
But you have said
if you notice that I seem anxious, that I really am, and that's why. And I wish I had known to say something like that to make it more human. I think that would have.
Well, that's actually one of the things that you've talked about, is that holding back something.
Yeah.
Keeps the shame and the energy going, but if you let it go, you have more freedom and expression.
Interesting. Maybe she was feeling shy or whatever, but anyway, I'm certainly. So if you read Intimate Connections, you'll learn a lot. But then I just did a search function here myself, like what you can do on the website. You can go to the show notes and see this. But podcast 128, intense social anxiety. I'm losing control. What can I do? That was a good one. Number 134, Smashing Shyness, Part 1. Podcast 135, Smashing Shyness, Part 2. 169, more on social anxiety, the case for vulnerability. That was Michael Simpson's awesome podcast. And then 142, performance anxiety, the story of Rhonda, Part 1. And 143, the story of Rhonda, the conclusion. And then number 88, feared fantasy, revisited.
That was great.
And there's a lot of really, really good resources there for you. So good luck on that, and let us know if you utilize some of these and try these things, and try opening up to that young lady at work, and tell us what happens. Also, I got an email. Oh, by the way, this is from a guy who did what I said to do.
Oh.
And he wrote back. I wish I had it right now, but essentially. This guy looks like a coronary cardiology doctor.
He looks like a cardiology doctor?
Well, his email, since he's working in the coronary care unit. And he wanted to ask out this other woman there, was some other kind of doctor. And she was very evasive. He was asking her, would you be interested in going out? Do you have any spare time later in the week? And she kept being very evasive. And so, fortunately, he didn't pursue her, because he'd read in the Intimate Connections not to chase people who were kind of giving you the runaround. But then he wrote a little feared fantasy, like, suppose I did ask her out here and she shot me down in front of everybody. What's the worst that could happen? And then he said, well, everyone will look and be shocked. And then half of the patients will go into cardiac arrest, and on and on. And at the bottom, he says, and then when I looked at all that, I said, well, so what? And it was such a relief. Like, what's the worst that could happen? So it really kind of cheered my heart that he had seen through his fears.
So did he stop?
I know, he just sent that email, and then
Well, if he's listening, could you tell us if she ever asked?
Huh?
If he's listening, I hope he responds and lets us know.
Oh yeah, tell us, give us an update. We'll feature you on a future podcast.
Yeah. Okay, here's Ask David number 2, and you've titled it, How Do You Get Over Your Fear of Vomiting? Dear Dr. Burns, I know you probably don't remember me because it's been years since we've emailed, but you helped me via your Ask David before.
Oh.
in the Guru section of your old website years ago, and we've occasionally emailed back and forth after that, which reminds me to once again thank you for your books and how you've dedicated your life to your work. It has made a difference in my life, and I would literally imagine in the lives of millions of others. What a wonderful thing. I stumbled upon an article about you in the Stanford magazine from 2013 and learned something I didn't know, that you suffered at one time from a fear of vomiting. I've dealt with that since I was a child. It's not as severe now as it once was, but I'm wondering what CBT methods might be useful for that particular issue. No chance I'm taking Ipecac. I know you're busy, so I understand if you can't answer. But I wanted to reach out anyway. Thank you so much in advance. Steve.
Steve, well, thank you, Steve, for that question. I can tell you how I got over my fear of vomiting. I'm not sure it will be helpful to you, but I was sitting here in this very office a number of years ago supervising Diane Spangler, who was a postdoctoral fellow, an NIMH kind of super brilliant and gracious young woman. And we used to sit here, and I was teaching her how to do statistical modeling with structural equation software. And we were having fun, and all of a sudden I got what is called Meniere's disease, although I didn't quite realize what was happening. And Meniere's disease is a virus that you can get an inner ear infection after you've had a cold or something. Oh. And it's not terribly dangerous, but what happens, and I remember reading about it in a textbook as one of the worst things that can happen to a human being, is that when you move your head, you go into projectile vomiting. And it's just a total biological thing, and you can't resist it. And Melanie, my wife, was at work at Kaiser, and so I just started vomiting constantly. I grabbed the wastebasket, and poor Diane didn't know what to do. And she said, "Well, it seems like you need to be alone. I'll leave." And I was thinking, "Please don't leave. I don't want to be alone." And so she left, and I must have vomited maybe more than 200 times that afternoon, and I had to crawl to get over to the couch, and it took about an hour and a half to get, because I kept vomiting, and every time I moved my head, I would vomit. And it was pretty awful, but I got over my fear of vomiting. It was like exposure therapy. I did it so much, like I couldn't care anymore about it. Yeah. And then Melanie got home, and she called Kaiser, and they said, "Well, since he can't take anything by mouth, we'll give him something to stick up one of his cavities." Some little lozenges, and they were very helpful. Oh, good. And by the next day, it was kind of over with. But that's the story. So you're suggesting that Steve do that? Huh? Are you suggesting that Steve do something like that? Well, I don't know how he'd do it. The only thing I can think of, and you'd have to have a physician help you, is when I worked in the emergency room and people would come in with drug overdoses, we'd give them oil of Ipecac, which would cause them to vomit. Correct. And so that would be one way you might be able to do it, is to just induce vomiting. You can also always do a daily mood log and say, what are you so afraid of? And if there's a social component, like, if I vomit in front of others, they'll judge me, then you can do real easy things like shame attacking exercises, like go and to some mall and order a greasy McDonald's burger and then chew on it and walk out and announce, "Oh my gosh, I think I'm about to vomit," and then pretend to go and barf in a barrel or some wastebasket or whatever you could find there, trash disposal kind of thing, to get over the embarrassment. But if it's just like mine wasn't the fear of judgment, it was just the raw fear, like, I'll choke, I'll die, I'll lose control, something terrible will happen, and for something like that, you might have to induce vomiting, or you can just put up with it. Like, how much of a barrier in your life could the fear of vomiting be? You know, like, I guess it's uncomfortable when you're sick to your stomach. I suppose you could get real drunk and then go vomit. And I remember that happened to me in college once. So, but the whole thing about exposure is to be exposed to intentionally to the thing that you're afraid of, and that's often curative. And we're going to have an upcoming podcast called The Phobia Cure. Yes. And it won't be for probably a few weeks yet, but we're going to work with my student, Matt May, and another of my students, his patient, Danielle Camus. Is that how do I pronounce her?
I don't know.
Camus, who had a weird phobia, the fear of leeches. And so we're going to do an actual podcast with her having leeches, putting them right on her arm and having them suck blood out of her. And the reason she wants this is because she does a lot of travel, like to Argentina and various places, doing research and working with the local people and stuff. And she often goes like fly fishing in rivers where there are leeches. I think she'll tell us more about it.
Great. Okay, here's number 3. Do you still use behavioral techniques, Dr. Burns? Dear Dr. Burns, I really appreciate your efforts in the area of cognitive behavioral therapy. Your efforts and techniques are so powerful, and you use them so efficiently that at almost no time do you have to use the behavioral part of cognitive behavioral therapy, as patients seem to be relieved enough with the cognitive work. One thing I'm curious about is that if you can't get enough response with cognitive work, and you have to use the exposure model, and the patient is afraid of exposure because he or she goes into a severe state of anxiety, depersonalization, or derealization symptoms, and feels like they're going to go crazy and lose control, would you still push him or her to the cognitive exposure, and are there any risks to that? Thank you very much, Jordan. But before you answer, I want to say that Steve, in the previous question, he even said in his question to you, there's no chance I'm taping Ipecac.
He says there's no chance, yeah. Well, actually, I have developed or learned and use more than 100 techniques in the treatment of depression and anxiety, and behavioral techniques of all kinds are still very, very important. And when you're treating anxiety, exposure, which is considered a behavioral technique, is absolutely crucial and mandatory. But it's only one of 4 models I use in the treatment of anxiety. I also use the cognitive model, which can be powerful and helpful, the motivational model. We had a workshop on that a couple weeks ago, how to melt away the patient's magical thinking, as well as the patient's fear of exposure. There's the hidden emotion model, and the exposure model. So I might be using 10 or 12 cognitive techniques with an anxious patient, 2 or 3 exposure techniques, several motivational techniques, and always include the hidden emotion technique. All that being said, the exposure is mandatory in the treatment of anxiety. I don't really think it's possible to cure any form of anxiety without exposure. It's not a treatment for exposure, it's just a tool and a treatment package for all forms of anxiety, but it's absolutely mandatory. Now, the reason treatment fails or backfires is because therapists don't always know good therapeutic skills. And we always work with TEAM, T-E-A-M, and we test at the start and end of every session, and then you have to empathize with the anxious patient, and you can't do anything until you're getting an A on empathy, because exposure requires trust. I push patients to do pretty extreme things, and if they don't trust me and like me, they're going to fight. And then there's the A, the agenda setting, melting away the patient's resistance, dealing with the magical thinking, the gentle ultimatum, many tools. And only then do we go on to methods which could include exposure. Now, I use extreme forms of exposure always. I'm highly aggressive. You mentioned, what if the patient goes crazy? Well, I've had many patients who are afraid of going crazy. That's one of the 2 most common symptoms of panic attacks, the fear of going crazy. And what I tell patients to do when they say they think they're going to go crazy, I say, oh, good, I want you to freak out totally. Let's see if you can go crazy right now. Try to drive yourself into a state of insanity. And I insist that they do it. And I might ask them to roll around on the floor and start screaming and sobbing uncontrollably and talking in tongues. And what they discover is that they can't go crazy no matter how hard they try, and whammo, suddenly it ends years or even decades of failed therapy. So the therapist has to be both skillful and compassionate, but also courageous and bold. And sometimes you have to push. And I would say almost every anxious patient, even once they've agreed to exposure, when it comes time to do it, They almost all fight, and I push them. I won't let them hold back, because if you let them hold back, that's avoidance, and that will massively cause the anxiety to get worse. The danger is not exposure, but the failure to use exposure.
You know, in Buddhism, there's an expression called the fierce no.
Oh.
That it's compassionate sometimes to say no to someone. So if someone, you've done testing and empathized, and you've melted away their resistance, and they've agreed to do exposure in the very beginning of therapy, and at the moment you're about to do the exposure, they say, oh, I'm not going to do it, then it sounds like what you're doing is at a compassionate, fierce no, like, no, I'm not going to let you rob yourself of this opportunity to get over your anxiety.
Yeah. Like on hikes, when I asked someone to, like we had a hiker. Again, I don't know if I told this story. I probably did. Someone's keeping track of when I repeat myself.
I know, I love that.
Robert Strauss. He's also the fellow who wrote that article in Stanford Magazine about me. So
I so appreciate him.
Yeah, he's so cool. But we had someone on a hike who had a resurgence of social anxiety, and there were about 15 people on the hike. And then she said she was getting anxious on the hike. And she feels like her jaw is going to start twitching. Oh. And it's just a whole physical thing, and it's so embarrassing to her, because she's a fantastic therapist, and then she thinks, oh, I'm a fraud and I'm a fake. So I just stopped the hike and said, just reveal to them what you're telling me. And she didn't want to do it. And I said, you have to do it right now. Just tell them. I said, this woman needs to talk to all of you, because she didn't even know a lot of the hikers. And then this husband and wife were coming down the trail. I said, could we stop you for a minute? This woman needs to talk to you too. And they didn't know what it was. Oh. And she just felt like she was about to die. So she blurted out that ever since she's little, these boys were teasing her in class, and ever since then she gets anxious, and she's afraid that her face is twitching, and she thinks it's twitching now, and she's afraid everyone's going to look down on her. And then I said, now ask them what they think of you. And so she asked them, and there was all this outpouring of love. It was just a shock to her. And then the two that were hiking down the trail that I had told them to stop and participate,
right.
Then they asked her, would you be willing to treat our daughter? She's very anxious too. And they exchanged information.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So her bravery to confront that, she was rewarded with stroking and a referral.
Yeah. But as a therapist, you've got to be courageous, and it's such an important point, because exposure, I've heard, is going out of fashion, and most therapists refuse to use exposure. Because they're so afraid of it, and they think something terrible is going to happen. And what's happened here is they've been hypnotized by their patients, by their clients, into thinking, oh God, exposure is terrible, I can't stand it, something awful is going to happen. But that's just another cognitive distortion.
Okay, here's the next one. And you've headlined it, should I try to include the empathy and agenda setting of team when trying to crush my negative thoughts on my own daily mood log? How would I do that? Dear Dr. Burns, it would be impossible for me to heap sufficient praise over you and your podcasts, because I've really gained an intangible amount of benefits and continue to learn something actionable from both on a weekly basis. I'm currently finishing your book, Feeling Good Together, and I'm finding the experience transformative. I wanted to see if I could ask you a question regarding the daily mood log and crushing negative thoughts. I am completely on board with the notion of fractal psychotherapy, and the idea that all of our negative emotions can be captured in a single negative thought, and by crushing it, we will feel substantial relief and even euphoria. I've been using the daily mood log to inconsistent effect. I write down my negative thoughts, identify the distortions, and then identify statements to attack that thought that are 100% true. Perhaps I'm rushing through this exercise too quickly as I try to make it a daily habit. But is it possible I'm missing an element? I've noticed in your live therapy that you allocate a sizable chunk of time to empathy and agenda setting. Is it possible that the empathy and agenda setting in team's absence in my daily mood log is stunting my progress? Is there a way, and should I be implementing both into the exercise? I would appreciate any input you have on this question, and I look forward to continuing to listen to the podcast as new episodes come out, along with your new book and your app. Best regards, Tommy. I mean, that's a really good question. How do you show empathy towards yourself, self-compassion?
Absolutely. That's the most important question, like in all of psychotherapy, and that's what TEAM has been created to solve that problem. In the old days of cognitive therapy, and in the current time, actually, for all these cognitive therapists in the world that got spawned after my book Feeling Good was published, I was trying to convert the world to cognitive therapy, and I was successful. Now I'm trying to convert the world to move on to team therapy, which is so much more powerful than cognitive therapy because it does emphasize the empathy, the therapeutic relationship, and also what you're calling paradoxical agenda setting, what we now call assessment of resistance. And Rhonda and I are going to be doing a series of podcasts, the best techniques for each of the 10 distortions. We've recorded 3 of them already, and we're going to start publishing them shortly.
And that's what your class on May 17th is going to be about with Jill.
Absolutely. And the first thing you always have to do is positive reframing. If you're working with a thought that triggers depression and anxiety, and list what does this thought show about me and my core values that's positive and awesome, and what are some benefits of this negative thought and the negative feelings that it's causing. And what we really do is try to sell the patient on not on change, but on not changing. And paradoxically, that eliminates the resistance. And once the resistance is gone, then all the techniques work much more powerfully. You see, if you're trying to challenge a negative thought, there's a lot of reasons that you're not going to be entirely successful. One is maybe you need to use the acceptance paradox rather than just self-defense. That's common. But another reason is maybe, like let's say you have the thought, I'm not good enough, and I should be better than I am, and I'm always screwing up. Well, that thought creates anxiety and angst and feelings of inferiority, but it may also stimulate you to do your best. It shows you have high standards, and maybe that thought is what's actually propelled you to much of the success that you've had. And until you see that there's something really beautiful and positive about the negative thoughts and your negative feelings, you'll kind of cling to them. Once you see what they're trying to tell you and you listen, you'll realize that you don't need them so much anymore. At least you don't need such intense negativity, and it'll be 20 times easier to crush the thoughts. Now, how do you do that? Well, my new book, Feeling Great, by the time this podcast comes out, you can pre-order it on Amazon, and it will be released in September. But you can start ordering it now if you're interested. And that book is all about how to do that on your own, even without a therapist. And I'm also, as you know, Rhonda, and are part of this project, working on this app with Jeremy Carmel, so you can, we'll be helping you in an automated way with this positive reframing, all the new bells and whistles that weren't in existence at the time that I wrote my first book, Feeling Good. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. You're onto something super important, and we are now working on ways to implement that and ways to show people how to maybe empathize with yourself much more skillfully, and also how to see the beauty in your negative thoughts and feelings before you try to change them.
That's awesome. You know, last Saturday I took a class on compassion with a Buddhist teacher, and I thought about you practically throughout the whole class and how the similarities between what they're teaching and what we do in team, what you've created in that team model. And one of the things they talked about was the importance of self-compassion and empathy
right?
Toward yourself.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean like grandiose narcissistic thoughts about your greatness, and it doesn't mean self-pity, but
right.
it means to think about what it is that you really appreciate about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a Buddhist principle, and it's really the secret. If you want to use the term self-esteem, self-confidence is the knowledge that you can succeed because you're really good at something. I used to be pretty good at table tennis, and I pretty much knew that anyone I played who wasn't a tournament player, I was just going to cream them. But that's not self-love. Mm-hmm. So self-love is the decision to love yourself as much or more when you fail as when you succeed. And when Feeling Good came out, my editor, Maria Guarnaschelli, told me that the president of the company had put it as number one on their loser list.
Oh.
That they would decide which books are going to make money and which books are going to lose money. And the president said no one wants a book on depression, so they wouldn't support it. And so my editor, Maria said, just here's 10 magazines that wouldn't publish a chapter from your book. Like that's one way to get publicity. So
Right.
She said, just here's the phone numbers and call them up and see if you can get them to change their minds. And I said, I don't know how to do that. And she said, well, you're going to have to just do your best. So I called like Ladies' Home Journal and Reader's Digest and all these. They were the 10 most popular magazines in the world. And then I was, I'm Dr. David Burns, and I've written this book, Feeling Good, and apparently it was rejected by your company for serial rights, but I'd really love to have you, reconsider it. And then they would all say the same thing. Please, Dr. Burns, we can't take any more calls from you. We consider this phone harassment.
No.
Once we've rejected your book, it's been rejected. Please don't ever contact us again. So, similar to that at all 10 places. And I felt so put down and humiliated. So when I went home that night, I told Melanie, I think we have to go out and celebrate tonight. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, why? I said, well, because I just had a horrible day and I got shot down right and left. And she said, why should we celebrate? And I said, well, because you don't need to celebrate when you win. You just feel great. What you need to celebrate when you lose and when you're like being pushed down by life, and that's when you need to love yourself and to celebrate life. So we went out and celebrated. And
Good.
I told myself, someday I'm going to overcome all of this, and eventually it went to number one on the national bestseller list. It took 8 years.
Well, you were very patient.
Well, I worked at it.
And you worked at it, yeah. Well, would you suggest to Tommy that he do that kind of an exercise to give himself and anyone else who's doing the daily mood log on their own to sit down and like think about or make a list of all the things they appreciate about themselves, or before they, as their own way of giving empathy?
You don't even have to appreciate things about yourself. See, that's conditional self-esteem. Like, I'm worthwhile because I have a good singing voice.
Or I'm worthwhile because I have friends, or I'm worthwhile for whatever the reason.
All of that. And what I call unconditional self-esteem is just the raw decision to love yourself because you need love. And the same way if you loved an animal and was hit by a car and it was still alive, you would love it, you would comfort it, you would bring it to the vet because it needs your love, and that's what you would do. Or if you had a child who was beaten up or hurt or injured, you would love your child, and it doesn't have to earn your love, or she doesn't have to earn your love. It's something you give, and that's this kind of self-esteem that's a choice, that you don't have to earn that. It can only be given to yourself as a matter of choice.
Mm-hmm. That you give it to yourself as a matter of choice.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Is that number 4 or number 5?
That was number 4. Shall we do one more?
Yeah, we can do one.
Okay.
I think this is a quickie.
Here's the quickie. Is it a quickie? Here's the title. It's called "Please Give Us a Podcast on How to Express Anger." Hey, Dr. Burns, I'm loving the podcasts, and my favorite podcasts are the Ask David and the live treatment ones. I can't wait for the new app and the new book. I do have one question, which I can go into more detail if I need to. Specifically, what podcasts and book would you recommend for anger? I'm unsure how to express anger in a productive way in my relationships, and I would love more guidance and practice prior to trying to use the 5 Secrets live. Thanks in advance.
Well, I can just give you some tips on it. You can chip in on this, Rhonda, too, on how to give anger. Anger would be considered an I feel statement. I'm feeling kind of hurt and angry last night. In fact, last night I was interacting with a colleague whose lady friend snips at him a lot, and he feels unfairly attacked, and he gets kind of ticked off. And we were talking about how to express that in a respectful, loving way, like to say, your criticisms often have a lot of validity, but I'm really feeling hurt right now. I'm feeling kind of angry right now. And I really love you and I really care about you, but I want you to know right now I'm, on the verge of killing you because it just hurts. And that's been happening between us a lot lately. And you're probably mad at me, and I want to listen and hear what you've got to say. I know there's truth in your criticisms. I probably failed you a lot and haven't shown my love and appreciation. Tell me more how you're experiencing this. Something like that. How would that sound?
That sounded really great.
Yeah. Now, it sounds easy, but it's not.
It's totally not.
And there's 3 ways you can express anger. That would be sharing anger in a respectful way. But the other 2 ways are passive aggression and active aggression. and in a way, those are more gratifying. Like active aggression, you can tell someone off and kind of argue with them and blame them.
You can yell back at them.
Yeah, you get behind a wall and throw stones at each other. That's what this couple has been doing recently. And that's kind of gratifying to do that. There's another question for a future podcast, but I think human beings do have lower forces, lower instincts. The desire to destroy, it competes equally with the desire to love. The desire to hate is a basic instinct, and love is a basic instinct, both. And so it's a decision you have to make. And you make yourself more vulnerable when you say, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling angry, and yet I want to hear how you're feeling. And I know that, I've failed you, and there's truth in your criticisms, and I want to listen, but I want you to know how I've been feeling too. That's sharing anger, and it's not the same as attacking anger. You can attack in a cold way, freezing people out, passive aggression. I love passive aggression because I can kind of stick it to you behind your back and maintain a facade of innocence, or just like refuse to talk to you, freeze people out. That's one way of hurting people, or just tell people off, put them down. That's the other thing that we do. Robert Frost had his poem Fire and Ice.
No.
It's he used to come to Amherst when I was a student there once a year, and he'd hang out and read his poetry and the Johnson Chapel and stuff. And but he had this one: some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and will suffice. Isn't that awesome?
Oh my God, that is so awesome and so true.
Yeah, and it just, we can freeze people out with hatred, or we can try to burn them alive. And that's what the world is involved in right now. That makes me sound like a corny old kook, but there's much hatred going around, and so much violence, and yet the sharing anger is much quieter, much gentler, but in a way far more powerful, because you come out from behind that wall and you open up and show yourself to be vulnerable. And more often than not, if you do it with heart and integrity and genuineness, the other person will lower their defenses too, and you can connect. When my wife and I were young, we used to fight like cats and dogs, and it takes a while, I think, to get over that. And now it's, I can. Things are pretty smooth, most of the time. But every now and then, she'll get mad at me and snap at me, and because I'll get insensitive or something, and I apologize. And then sometimes I tell her, I'm feeling kind of beaten up on right now, and I don't like it, and I'm hurting right now. I'm feeling kind of angry, and she hears and listens, and those statements are on both sides are just so effective, and so. The tense moments, they just blow away and they're gone. And but it takes a decision to go with loving anger, and to give up the joys of blame and feeling like a victim and feeling feeling morally superior. And it's again, to quote Robert Frost, the sharing anger in a loving way is the road less traveled by. And most people would rather do something more flashier, more gratifying.
I would only add in my relationship, there are times when I'm so angry I can't be that loving expression of it, and I might need to take a break, like take an hour break to calm down and then come back together and have that kind of a discussion.
I've often failed with patients during a session, and for one reason or another, and then later I think about it and see where I screwed up, and the next time I see the patient, the next session, I say, would you mind revisiting last session? I think I realized I really screwed up, and I'd like to try again. And there's 99% of the time people are ever so gracious to give you a second shot. It's not always easy to do it when we're under the heat of anger and in the heat of the moment. Right. But if you have these tools to use, you can make a pretty nice comeback.
Okay.
Did I talk about my upcoming workshops?
Yes, you did. You did that at the beginning, and I think now would be, after that beautiful poem, and I feel like this would be a really good place to stop today's episode.
Especially since we're out of time. Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all our listeners.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.